Hello everyone and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier, and a little while ago I made a video on the iconic Minox sub-miniature camera. And yes, as many of you pointed out, it is pronounced Minox, not Minox, as I say throughout that video. I had always heard it pronounced Minox and thus never thought to double check. What can I say? Language is hard. Anyway, today I wanted to jump back into the fascinating world of the Minox camera by having a look at some of the many accessories that were produced for this camera. Now, before we get started, if you haven't watched my previous video on the Minox camera, please go and do that now since I go over the history, design, and the multiple versions of that camera. And as always, this is not intended to be a collector's channel, and so I won't be going over every single accessory that was ever produced for the Minox. I just want to give a general overview of the wide variety of accessories that were available and the very clever design that went into adapting them to such a small camera. And so without further ado, let's jump right in. Now, interestingly, the existence of so many accessories actually goes against the original design intent for the Minox. See, while the Minox has become infamous as this sneaky spy camera for photographing secret documents, its inventor, Walter Zapp, originally intended it as an ordinary consumer camera that was compact enough to carry with you anywhere. And so having all of these bulky accessories to lug around with you would have rather defeated the point. And as a result, the first Riga cameras that were produced just before and during the Second World War came with very few accessories. The main one being this measuring chain, which allowed you to measure the distance to your subject when photographing objects close up. And there were two different varieties of these. Metric chains were 40 centimeters long and had these marker beads spaced at 20, 24, and 30 centimeters, while imperial chains were 24 inches long and had beads at 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, and 18 inches. And these are fitted with this little rectangular locking lug, which you push and twist into the socket at the end of the camera. Now, another major accessory that formed part of the original Minox system was the daylight developing tank, which allowed you to develop the film at home without needing a separate darkroom. Now, while this was doubtless useful for intelligence operatives since it eliminated the need to bring your film to a photo lab where the technician could see your top secret photographs and blow your cover, it was also very useful for ordinary Minox users since the 8x11mm film required special care and attention to develop, which many photo labs couldn't manage. And this became more of a problem near the end of the 20th century as photo labs started adopting automatic mini labs that were standardized around the then dominant 35mm film format. So it became increasingly difficult for Minox users to find commercial services to develop their film. So this tank consists of four basic parts. We have the main tank body, we have a lid, we have this auger, and we have a thermometer. And unfortunately, the thermometer in this particular example has broken, but thankfully this is an alcohol and not a mercury type, so this is relatively safe. So to use this, you thread the auger into the top of the lid and with the metal clip first. You then remove the film cartridge from the camera, pull out the film leader, place the cartridge in this well in the bottom of the lid, then push the leader under the clip to fix it in place. You then place the cap on top of the main tank body and thread the auger in, which will spool the film out of the cartridge and onto the spiral groove. The next step is to pour 53 milliliters of developing solution into this hole. Originally, users had to source and mix their developer themselves, but in 1950, Minox began offering a proprietary fine-grained developer kit containing a glass measuring cup and pre-measured sachet of A and B developer, fixer, and wetting agent. In 1978, a new kit was introduced containing 53 milliliter ampules of pre-mixed chemicals whose necks could be broken off using a rubber sleeve. Later, this was changed to plastic vials with screw-top lids. Now, the original Minox film cartridges held 50 exposures, but in 1968, the company introduced smaller cartridges holding 36, then 15 exposures. And to accommodate these, the company also released a series of spacers that you could drop into the regular developing tank, and this would limit the travel of the auger, as so. So this particular example is for 15 exposures. The one for 36 exposures, of course, would be shorter. And when the 50 exposure cartridges were discontinued altogether, then special 36 exposure augers were produced. Now, once your developer was poured in, you would insert your thermometer and then move it in and out. And thanks to the design of the tank, this would act as a pump to circulate developer over the film. Now, originally the cross-section of the spiral groove on the auger was square, but in 1957 this was changed to a shallow V groove to allow the developer to circulate over the back of the film. And then once the development process was finished, you would then pour out your developer through this spout. You would pour in water to rinse off the film. Then you would pour in your fixer, pump, drain, rinse, and finally you'd be able to pull out your auger and your film. So a very elegant and well thought out design. Indeed, other than the spacers and the change in profile of the spiral groove, this design remained pretty much unchanged for over 60 years. And the last production batch was still made of bakelite rather than more modern plastics. Now, the last major accessory to be produced for the Riga Minox was a tripod adapter. This was a simple steel cradle with a 3/8-inch threaded socket, and since it had no positive locking mechanism, the camera could only be used vertically, or else it would fall out. After the war, the cradle was enlarged slightly to offer additional support, and the material switched from steel to aluminium. But it wasn't until the mid-1950s that a locking mechanism was introduced, allowing the camera to be used at any angle, and that's what we have here. As you can see, the cradle slips over the bottom of the camera, after which you twist this narrow knob to lock this rectangular lug into the socket for attaching the measuring chain. And this also features this little flip-up arm, which, as you can see, aligns perfectly with the shutter release button. And this allows us to attach a cable release as so. And that brings me neatly to the Minox Tabletop Tripod, which was introduced in 1951. Now, this comes in a nice leather holster. When I pull this out, you'll be forgiven for thinking that this is actually a monopod, but not so. See, if I unthread the end, I have my cable release, one leg, and two legs, and these thread into these sockets at the top to form a handy little tabletop tripod that I can thread onto my tripod adapter as so. And originally, the cable release was packaged separately, but Minox quickly realized that it was more convenient and elegant to store it inside the tripod legs. Now, in 1954, Minox introduced a copying stand, an adjustable height quad pod originally intended for copying books and documents in libraries and archives, but which doubtless saw extensive use in intelligence circles. The adjustable legs featured engraved lines calibrated to photograph DIN A6, A5, and A4 paper sizes. Now, slight modifications to the design had to be made in 1978 to accommodate the new Minox LX, which had a different control configuration from previous models. Minox also produced an Enlarger, the first version of which was designed by Walter Zapp himself and manufactured alongside the original Riga camera throughout the Second World War. Production resumed post-war by Minox GmbH, with the Model 1 being manufactured from 1950 to 1951, and the Model 2 from 1951 to 1987. There were many minor differences between the various models, the main one being the introduction of a special arm on the Model 2 for document copying. A separate clamp-on arm was also produced to retrofit the Model 1 for this purpose. All models can enlarge 8 by 11 millimeter images up to 11 by 14 inches or 28 by 35.6 centimeters. Now, an accessory that you would assume would be essential for any consumer camera is a flash. But strangely, Minox GmbH was very slow to produce such an accessory, despite the fact that the 1954 Minox A came with a flash synchronization jack. Instead, they produced a cold accessory shoe that attached the measuring chain socket, allowing the Minox to be used with any standard flash gun with a synchronization cable. In 1955, however, Minox USA, with support from the German parent company, introduced the BC flashbulb unit with a large folding fan reflector, while in 1956 they produced an electronic flash. Given the state of electronic technology at the time, this was not a one-piece integrated unit. Rather, the flash tube clipped onto the camera and was connected by a wire to a belt pack containing the batteries, capacitors, and other circuitry. And finally, in 1961, Minox GmbH came out with its own version of the BC flash gun, which is what we have here. And there were 3 different versions of this produced. There was the short shoe version for use with the Minox A, the long shoe version for use with the Minox B, like we have here, and the Model U, or Universal, which had a standard accessory shoe and a synchronization cable, so could work with any standard camera. This just slips over the end of the camera and has an internal connector that slots right into the synchronization jack. And as you can see, there is a cutout here for the light meter photocell. At the back, we have a slider that extends a small sheet metal reflector, and in front of that, a slot for an AG1 subminiature flash bulb. When the bulb has been fired, you push down on the slider to retract the reflector, and the bulb pops right out. And if we pull off the outer aluminium cover, we can see the 15-volt battery inside. Minox also produced flash guns for use with flash cubes, which I've covered in a previous video on the history of camera flashes, link as always in description. The first model, the B4, was introduced in 1966, while the second, the C4, was introduced in 1969 and is compatible with all Minox cameras up to the LX. When that camera was introduced in 1978, the C4 was redesigned to fit it and became the FL4. The first German-produced electronic Minox flash, the MU1, was introduced in 1967, and like the earlier American model, was a two-part unit with a flash module connected to the camera and a separate belt pack for the batteries and capacitors. This was replaced in 1971 by the ME2, which thanks to improved electronics technology was an integrated one-piece unit. In the late 1970s, Minox USA also produced a hot shoe that connected directly to the flash synchronization jack to allow third-party flash guns without synchronization cables to be attached. These earlier bulky flashes were later followed by more compact and faster charging modules like the 9x11 in 1990, the ECX in 1998, and the MX in 2001. And finally, the last Minox accessory that I have an example of here is a projector. Now, the very first Minox projector was produced in 1950 by the Holly Slide Company at the request of its customers and was not part of the official Minox line. However, in 1954, Minox GmbH introduced 8x11 AGFA color reversal slide film along with the proprietary HP30 projector, which is what we have here. So this comes in a very nice leather case, which opens up just like this. And after undoing this snap, the projector slides right out. At the back, we have our power cable and on-off switch. And at the front, a focus-adjustable Minostar 35mm f2.9 objective lens. And below this, we have a knob that extends or retracts this footplate to raise and lower the image. This can project slides up to 15 by 15 millimeters, with full-size slides or adapters for 8x11 transparencies dropping into the sliding carriage just behind the lens. And if we push this button, the cover pops open, and under these folding cooling fins, we can see our 100-watt lamp and our collimating mirror. I also have a set of aluminium adapters here for holding 8x11 Minox transparencies. These comprise 4 parts, a front and back metal frame, a metal mat, and a glass slide, and all of these stack together as so. And these can also fit into this plastic magazine, which is designed for use with the Minomat, Minotac, Minomat N, and HP24 automatic projectors introduced in 1962, 1963, 1965, and 1970, respectively. Now, those are all the Minox accessories that I had examples of, but there were many, many more. And one of the more interesting was a binocular adapter that allowed the Minox to be attached to a telescope or a set of binoculars, turning that instrument into a telephoto lens. The first version, introduced in 1952, used a solid adapter ring and thus was limited to optics of a certain diameter, but later this was changed to a more universal split ring clamp. There were also other accessories, including proprietary light meters, sets of clip-on lens filters for both black and white and color film, handheld magnifying viewers, large microfiche viewers, right angle and reflex viewers that clipped over the viewfinder or to the side of the camera, and these were intended for candid photography, allowing the Minox to be used much like a twin-lens reflex camera. Strangely, however, Minox never offered their own self-timer, though Frido Wissehaven and Heinrich Klapproth of Hamburg did make a series of mechanical timers that worked with Minox and other sub-miniature cameras, provided they had a cable release feature. And that, dear viewers, is a brief overview of the many accessories manufactured for the Minox camera. A bit of a tech light video this time, but as soon as I saw these accessories for sale on eBay, I knew I had to make a follow-up to my previous Minox video. Now, as cool as this collection is, it's not going to remain mine for very long because it will be going to channel viewer Phil Rea, who successfully solved the cipher in my previous video on Civil War codes and ciphers, the solution to which informed the successful cryptanalysts that they had won this Minox B and all of its accessories. So congratulations, Phil, and enjoy this collection. And for those of you who are still stumped by those ciphers, the solution is actually to copy the cipher cylinder that appears in the first few minutes of the video. So if you still want to try your hand at it, there you go. That is the approach. Now, before I end off the video, I do need to mention that a little while back, I made a video announcing that I would be making a Q&A video by the end of the year. But unfortunately, since then, I have not received enough questions to make such a video worthwhile. So that will have to wait until the new year. So keep sending your questions, comments, suggestions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them on camera sometime soon. Anyway, this will be my last video before the new year. So Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you so much for watching and for all your support. And I'll see you next time in another video or look at yet more fascinating devices just like this one. Until then, I'm Jean Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.